In the quiet glow of candlelight within a Dresden palace chamber, on May 12, 1670, as silk curtains breathed softly and noble attendants murmured beneath vaulted ceilings, a child was born who would challenge the limits of flesh and crown alike, Augustus of Saxony, whose newborn hand gripped a nurse's finger with such force that whispers spread instantly through the room, as if destiny itself had announced his arrival, and from that moment the path of Augustus II, later called the Strong, began. Not as legend but as possibility, forged through discipline and expectation as he grew beneath stone courtyards and fluttering banners, lifting weights meant for grown soldiers, sweat streaking his brow while resolve hardened within him, never yielding, never complaining. His body shaped early into an instrument of power, while his mind absorbed maps and histories in study halls filled with globes and parchment, learning the fragile balance between knowledge and force, understanding that Europe was not ruled by strength alone but by cunning, alliance, and timing, lessons refined further as he traveled through Paris and the great courts of Europe, walking among perfumed nobles and glittering carriages, smiling politely while measuring rivals silently, absorbing etiquette as carefully as ambition, before astonishing courts and common halls alike by bending iron horseshoes with bare hands, transforming raw strength into spectacle and spectacle into reputation, earning a name that would follow him forever, until Saxony bowed beneath its banners as he stepped into the throne hall to claim the ducal seal, asserting authority not through words but presence. Yet his gaze soon turned eastward toward Poland, toward a crown chosen not by blood but by election, heavy with intrigue and resistance, and knowing the price. He knelt beneath cathedral incense, converting faith for sovereignty, rising altered in belief but unchanged in desire, and when messengers thundered across the election fields of 1697 announcing his victory amid cheers and outrage, and when the crown settled upon his head in Wawel Cathedral, Augustus II stood crowned over Poland and Saxony alike, gripping the throne not in triumph alone but in awareness of the burden he had seized, ruling two realms with one will, signing Saxon decrees while demanding Polish loyalty, until war gathered like a storm across the north, councils darkened with maps of Sweden, fists struck tables, and ambition marched onto frozen battlefields where cannons roared and smoke swallowed men. For he had challenged Charles XII, young, brilliant, and undefeated, and when defeat came it struck brutally, leaving Augustus surveying fields of fallen soldiers, jaw clenched as truth cut deeper than any blade, that physical strength could not bend fate. And so the Polish crown was stripped from him amid shouting nobles and fractured assemblies, leaving him exiled a king without a kingdom, staring through rain-soaked windows in Saxony, gripping steel not in victory but in defiance, refusing surrender, rebuilding armies and forges filled with sparks and sweat, waiting for fortune's return. And when Sweden finally collapsed at Poltava and Europe's balance shifted once more, Augustus returned through Warsaw's gates, crowds gathering as he rode beneath familiar walls, restored yet forever changed, ruling again amid broken unity, listening to petitions with weary eyes, facing noble resistance crystallized in the cry of Liberum Veto, watching reforms die before they could breathe, retreating instead into splendor where gold plates gleamed, music echoed, and art flourished under his patronage, where passion followed power into scandal and whispered excess. Yet still he dreamed of dynasty, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, hoping continuity might succeed where reform had failed. Even as armies weakened, Polish institutions hollowed, and Saxony alone thrived with rising streets and flourishing trade, until time, the one force no muscle could defeat, revealed itself in mirrors where powdered wigs came off and aging eyes stared back. Throne halls once filled with footsteps echoing empty, Europe redrawing itself without him, and at his final festival he watched dancers spin like memories of youth, before illness crushed breath from his powerful chest, physicians whispering helplessly as the strong body finally yielded, and with trembling hand he signed his final commands, sealing duty into wax before dawn claimed him quietly in 1733, bells tolling as Augustus the Strong passed from flesh into history, carried through Krakow beneath black banners, lowered into cathedral stone where torches dimmed and silence reclaimed the crown. Yet in taverns his feats grew larger than truth, iron bending stronger with every retelling, even as Poland weakened in empty assemblies and Saxony's skyline continued to shine, his son crowned beneath ancient rituals, portraits comparing might and failure side by side, scholars debating with quills, Whether he was architect of decline or prisoner of his age, symbol of excess or warning of power without reform. A strong man bound to a weak system, remembered today by tourists beneath Wawel's towers and plaques polished by time. One chapter among many in Europe's long turning, where thrones gather dust, crowns dissolve into lessons, and wisdom outlives muscle, leaving behind not a monster nor a hero alone but a man, born on May 12, 1670. Forged in iron and ambition, undone by the limits of power, his shadow stretching long across history, his legacy a contradiction carved into stone, art, and memory. As sunsets fall behind castles and eras close, until at last only his name remains glowing briefly against the dark. Augustus II the Strong. Powerful in body, complex in rule, eternal in remembrance. And yet remembrance does not end with burial nor legend with silence. For after the bells faded and the stone crypt sealed, Augustus II the Strong continued to live in subtler ways, in arguments whispered through academies and taverns alike, in the tension between admiration and blame that followed his name wherever history was spoken, because he was not merely a king to be remembered but a question to be answered, a contradiction standing at the crossroads of strength and failure, where Europe itself struggled to define power in an age shifting away from muscle toward institutions, and as decades passed, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth drifted further into paralysis, its empty assemblies and fractured sovereignty reflecting the weaknesses Augustus had battled but never defeated, prompting later generations to look backward and ask whether his reign had been a cause, a symptom, or simply a mirror of a system already cracking under its own weight, while in Saxony the Baroque palaces he commissioned still caught the light of morning, their stones speaking more clearly than decrees ever had, reminding visitors that here ruled a man who understood beauty, spectacle, and permanence, even when politics slipped from his grasp, and so his memory split along borders just as his life had, remembered in Poland with ambivalence and regret, in Saxony with pride and admiration, and in Europe as a symbol of an era when kings still believed the body itself could command destiny. A belief, already fading even as he lived, for the 18th century would belong increasingly to diplomacy, bureaucracy, and reform rather than raw force, and Augustus, born too late for medieval heroism and too early for modern statecraft, stood stranded between worlds. His immense physical presence almost tragic against the subtle mechanisms of power he could never fully master, and historians would later note how his legendary strength bent iron yet could not bend the liberum veto.